Thank you for tuning in. This is the Whippersnappers podcast, providing you with the youthful perspective on science fiction and fantasy and everything in between. I'm Corey McCleary, and I'm one of your hosts. Let me introduce my other friends. With me is Anthony Marchetta, the editor of the Hugo-nominated short story, An Unimaginable Light. Yes, by the illustrious John C. Wright, and editor of the rest of the stories in that anthology, God Robot. We also have with us today A.M. Freeman, the author of the controversial short story in the critically acclaimed and very well-selling Forbidden Thoughts anthology. April.
Hello.
We have with us today Orville Wright, a frequent commentator on the Whippersnappers, and apparently one of the clones of John C. Wright, grown in his basement.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to meet you all.
And last but not least, we have Clone Mark II, aka Justinian Wright, another
Mark III, not Mark II.
Mark Frey, sorry. Frequent commentator on the Whippersnappers. Sorry, I forgot about the other one.
Yep.
Greetings.
All right. So, to kick us off today, we are talking about trends in fiction, specifically, and I don't know why this wasn't in the show notes, the trend to add more diversity to fiction, the push to have more diverse fiction. And I'm someone who actually kind of writes this stuff myself, so I'll leave my opinions afterwards. But Anthony, what are your basic thoughts on the subject?
I think that the idea of diversity in fiction, I think the whole conversation is kind of a silly one since, first of all, when you look back historically, especially in sci-fi and fantasy history, you'll see this a lot with the Pulp Revolution guys going through older works and going through histories. One of the great things they've done is pointed out that the no diversity in fiction thing has basically never been true, that there have been all cultures all over represented in sci-fi, because I don't think that diversity matters as such, except what it adds or takes away from your stories. So go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was one of the things I should say is, like, if you mention female science fiction authors, it's usually Ursula K. Le Guin or a woman named Octavia Butler. Well, who we all should know is Leigh Brackett. She wrote Star Wars. I mean, how much more geek cred do you need than this is the woman who wrote Star Wars Episode 5, I think. I think that's the one she wrote.
Draft 1 of Episode 5.
You need none.
Yes.
You've won the geek cred game if you've done that.
There's no one higher than that. You can't exceed that. Anyway, April, your position?
Basically my position is, if it works for your story, do it. Do what makes the most sense for the story. So, like, if, like, I have an island that's kind of stuck in time and has basically any sort of person ever, so I can come up with winged creatures or Australian guys with guns in their arms or things like that. So I think it's good to sometimes be if you have the opportunity, see what kind of characters you could put in or play with. Basically, just do what works with the story.
Right. All right, Orville, your position.
I do not get the come back to me. I need to
You need a moment to formulate your thoughts. Well, yeah. Just, do you have anything to say?
Not much. I would just like to point out that in the books I read, which are about animals, they have more diversity than any book that they write, because they have, like, mice and badgers.
Yeah, you have different species talking with each other. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's what I want. I'm going to say this. Science fiction and fantasy, you have things of completely different mindsets and races talking amongst each other. One of the main characters of one of the major franchises, Star Wars and Star Trek, both of them are aliens. One's a Wookiee, and the other's the Vulcan Spock. Like,
I think so. I think someone said that.
You cannot get more diverse than a world with elves and aliens. So
I was going to say, well, Spock's basically a space elf.
Yeah, he's a space elf. Oh, you cannot get more diverse than space elves. Oh, the problem I think here is I'm not sure we have anyone who's on their side, so we really really need a devil's advocate in this case, frankly.
Yeah, we need someone to say that it's bad, because that's not my position. I actually write these kind of crazy books, but my only position, I think that the only way I could really take the devil's advocate on this and still remain vaguely sensible is if the desire to write diverse characters, say, eclipses the desire to write a functional story. That's the only point where it would make sense, and in the sense that, yeah, and then you're running into the problem is you don't have a story. Yeah, work on that.
Frankly, as stated, science fiction and fantasy are diverse by nature. You will always have. You will never. Even if they look the same, as in their skin tone is vaguely whitish, that doesn't matter. Color does not. I'm colorblind. I'm from an area. I live next to black girls, and my sister is Chinese. I do not. Color is not a factor in my mind.
Yeah. Well, that actually kind of segues into another point, but I'll give my little spiel because.
Okay.
My publisher said what I said was a good analogy, and I'm going to trust the guy who's I'm doing business with. And this is actually basically my position is that diversity. If you think of your book, if you can liken a book to anything, a book's like a morsel, a dish rather, of food that you make, and diversity is like cinnamon. Now, cinnamon is delicious when used correctly. If you're baking it into a pastry, it tastes wonderful. It's awesome, and I'm getting distracted anyway. If you, the issue is diversity works for things like pastries or a pinch of hot chocolate. And Orville, do you mind muting yourself? You seem to be getting some interference in the background.
Sorry. Oh, stop it.
All right. Sorry about that. But the issue with cinnamon is cinnamon doesn't go with everything. Like another food that I really like is a salad that's a mixture of avocados, cucumber, and tomato with balsamic vinaigrette. Throwing some ground up cinnamon on that's not going to taste too good, at least in my mind. I haven't tried it, but here's the other thing: diversity alone will not carry a story, and we can prove that because have you seen the cinnamon challenge? The internet has provided us with enough proof that
too much of a good thing is never a good thing.
Pure cinnamon is not a meal in and of itself. But I mentioned. You're
go ahead, Corey.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, because I would go a step further. I don't really think diversity is in any way a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just think it's a thing. It's a thing that will make sense sometimes and will not make sense other times. There's a show, very famous anime show. Probably all of you have heard of it, Cowboy Bebop.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
right?
I
And I learned an interesting... Yeah. And I think I learned a fact the other day about Cowboy Bebop that was interesting. The character of Ed on the show. She's like a 12-year-old... My brother likes to call her autistic. She's kind of crazy. Funniest character on the show. Refers to herself in the third person.
She looks mad.
That whole Cloud Cuckoo-lander type of thing. Well, Ed was originally going to be a male character. Ed was originally written as a guy, and then the writer of Cowboy Bebop said that he decided to change the character to a female because he wanted an even number of girls and guys on the ship. Now, interesting things about the story. The first is that whatever you say about it, there are some with the character of Ed imagined as a female and the character of Ed imagined as a male. For one thing, you're going to be more willing, and this is just the way it is, whether you like the idea or not, but her as so crazy, you're going to be more willing to excuse it and accept it and find it cute if it's a little girl than if
Little
it's
girls are
an
inherently
adolescent boy.
cute, so.
I mean, she's little-ish, but if she's a cute girl, then you're going to more easily forgive that sort of thing and find it cute as opposed to annoying. The second thing, too, is that it makes a difference, even if you didn't intend to originally do it this way, it makes a difference in how the character is going to act. You'll see scenes of Ed doing another character phase nails and things that I can't really imagine would have been in there if they had decided to make Ed a guy, and she gets into a relationship with Faye, where Faye becomes like an older sister character that again would be a completely different sort of relationship.
Well, I'd imagine,
and it makes a difference.
I'd imagine that painting the nails, if it was a guy, because from the sounds of it, I haven't seen the anime, but it sounds like the character's basically off their rocker.
Little bit.
Yeah. So for that character, it might not be unfeasible for her to. For her, if it was a guy, to paint someone's nails, but it would be a completely different kind of mood that would be induced.
Decision. Yeah, you would think of the character much differently if that happened and it was a guy. No matter whether you intend it or not, the way that you think about the character, the way the character is portrayed to the audience, it makes a difference that it's a girl. And that doesn't make it a bad decision that they decide to do that. In fact, I think it was a good decision. I really like the dynamic of the ship and Cowboy Bebop and the crew. But it is something that I don't think you can ever ignore, is always going to be a factor. Differences between guys and girls, which is a subset of diversity, definitely. Now, if you want to talk about things like diversity of race, that's a whole other matter and depends on many different things. The point, though, is that consequences to your decisions. The whole thing where John Scalzi was praised for writing a book that they couldn't tell the difference between the main character if it was a male or a female, and he was praised
that wasn't John
for this.
Scalzi. That wasn't John
I thought
Scalzi.
that was Lock-In, wasn't it? His book Lock-In?
I don't know if it was Lock-In. No, there's a book called, I think the one you're referring to is called, there's a book called Ancillary Justice, which I have not read.
Not that.
So you're talking about something. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
What do we mean by diversity? Do we mean racial diversity, or do we mean differences in characters? Because those are two completely different things.
I think what we're talking about is diversity in several aspects. I think mostly at the moment we're talking about superficial things, like whether it's boys or girls or skin or species, but there's other types. I'm sure we're going to get into the topic of diversity of like thoughts and like religions or.
Because diversity is not just a racial thing. There's diversity of ages, old versus young. Hence the Whippersnappers. We are diverse from the old people. There's the diversity of culture. There's the diversity of everything. Diversity just comes from a part of separation or individuality. It's like judging if we focus on skin color or sexuality, then we are limiting. What are we talking about? What most people mean when they say diversity? That's my question.
At the moment, yes, though we can go into diversity of characterization. Because
I'd like to later get into. I haven't read a whole lot of the newer fiction aside from like a handful of authors, but I'm curious to know if the more modern fiction has much of a diversity of in the characters. Like if they all kind of follow the same thought wave, or if there's drastically different philosophies.
Right.
Well, it's one of the things science fiction has always been kind of notorious for since the 50s and onwards, past the pulp era again, that science fiction has had very little diversity of thought, with the worldview inherent coming from this materialistic, atheistic, Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov perspective, when now we're in the more recent trends of people like John C. Wright, who are writing hard, and even Interstellar to an extent, who are writing hard sci-fi with a philosophy that skews more towards the superversive and to the religious end too, for that matter, which goes back to diversity of ideology.
It's actually, I probably should have announced this, but I do have to say one thing, and it's a bit of a, not really a confession, but more of a disclosure of not a conflict of interest, but a little thing. I've actually just, it's a bit of an announcement. I've just finished my novel, Fever Blood, and I've sent the very, very rough draft to my editor, L. Jadji Lamplighter, and I mentioned this when I was talking to her, because I said that while I was writing this, I'm going to start writing something else too. I'm writing a science fantasy space opera thing. I blame John C. Wright for actually getting me to start writing more
Science fiction?
Yeah, more not science fiction per se, but specifically space opera. But the thing with Fever Blood is the main character of my story is not human, or rather, he's half human. He's a dragon. He's half human, half dragon. He's the face I have up here. And the half of the characters in my, actually, like a majority of main characters in what I like to term the A and the B teams in that story are not human. There's that aspect to just having non-human characters, and there's also like my human characters are from all over the world too. That's the other issue. But
you have basically you have a ton of diversity in your story. So
yeah, that just comes from having a ton of characters.
Yeah, because you're gonna make everyone's different. That's just how that works.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I was going to say was to bring to the science fiction thing. I'm writing my science fantasy story has a kind of vaguely theological premise, but I'll get into that later. But the main character of that is, like, when people talk about we want diverse characters, the main character of that is a Lebanese Indian American woman.
A what?
And by Lebanese Indian American.
Well, how? What's Lebanese?
From Lebanon.
Where's Lebanon?
Country in the Middle East.
How can you be an American Indian and be a...
No, Indian as in from India.
Oh, that makes more sense. So an Indian woman, basically.
She's a mix. She's a mix of like...
Yeah,
I don't know.
Mix.
Not in her... She has alien DNA in her genome. Someone ran off with an alien like 10 generations back in her story. And the only reason for that is to explain why she has yellow eyes. But
why yellow eyes?
It's what they had.
I'm asking stupid questions.
But
okay.
The only reason I came up with that was I came up with her name, just typed in something random in this little in the file I was doing, because I'm like, I want to write something for NaNoWriMo. I had a cool idea for possibly a short story about this. How about I expand it into a novel? So I just typed out her name, and I'm like, okay, what nationality has this first name and this last name? First name came from Lebanon, and the last name came from India. So I'm like, well, I guess that's where she's kind of from. And she had to be American for part of the plot and linguistic stuff.
So you can write in English.
Yeah, well, less of that so she can speak English. She speaks English. Well, she speaks English.
That makes sense.
Passable in Hindi and a bit more fluent in Mandarin. But the whole thing with that story is it's just that's like probably the least important aspect of it, of her or her character. The more important aspect is, oh, she's a space alchemist, and a ridiculously strong one too.
Ah,
Makes sense.
Yeah, I had a character in a story. I mentioned this to Corey. I'm sure he may or may not remember it because it was a while ago.
Probably
I
not
have
a bad
an
memory.
outline in it. Yeah, maybe not. I have an outline for a story called Paladin, which is like supposed to be an
I kind of
inner
remember
city
this.
superhero who's the knight of King Arthur who fights crime on the streets of inner city New Jersey, basically. And I had a full outline for the book written, and the villain of the book was a vampire called, I named him Blood Money, and he was a mind controlling vampire. And Trump Money is he was like a gang. He was a gang member who rose to the top of the ranks after like basically sacrificing his soul to the devil, in a sense, becoming a vampire and gaining these powers. And now he's controls supernatural creatures and is waging a gang war on the city. And in my head,
It's the one with the fire
Money,
truck thing you're talking about, right?
yes, that would be it. And in my head, Blood Money is a black character because he's the head of an inner city gang, and you're generally going to find minorities there. It's going to be Hispanic, it's going to be black more often than not. There was no hidden agenda here. There was no, and I'm going to make him the bad guy because he's black. It was, hey, let's look at the makeup of inner city gangs.
You do
Well,
what
this is
makes
what I
sense
have.
for
gang
you.
member who happens to be black.
And Lancelot, who is the character, he is, of course, white because he is a French immortal knight. So what is he going to be?
Yeah.
It's
Purple.
Blue.
Well, I was
Yeah.
going to say it's not really just inner city gangs; it's inner city stuff. Like
inner city New Jersey too, which trust me, it's
the demographics of
Yeah.
any inner city stuff usually tends to skew more towards what we consider minority populations. That's
the one thing in Daredevil that he fights Irish gangs, and I find it hilarious because you just know that like they can't really put actual minorities as the heads of these gangs because the Irish mob is very weak nowadays. And if you wanted to do an actual gang that Daredevil would be fighting, it would be the Bloods or the Crips or something like that. But they would never ever do that.
Don't tell me if I haven't gotten that far into season 2, but there's I remember at one point he first finds out about, oh, it's only one guy taking all these guys down. I think it was Cartels.
Yeah, Punisher.
Which Punisher's freaking awesome. But that's Daredevil is a discussion for another time because spend way too much time on there. Well, here's another
I
funny
love
thing.
Daredevil, yeah, but
Yes. Well, here's another funny thing that I've noticed is that there are lots of books that are touted as being diverse when the actual cast of characters is usually in one demographic sense, whether it's race or religion or sex or whatever. The entire group is homogenous in one form. But I think the reason that they'll say it's diverse is because they differ from am I coming through all right?
Yes.
Yes.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, they differ from the supposed
From
norm.
how from how society has said they are to be. We're gonna have nothing but strong female characters and nothing but weak, evil men with no strength behind them and no strength as villains and stuff like that.
In John C. Wright's review of Beauty and the Beast, he mentions in passing. I remember reading it and laughing, and he mentions in passing in one of the lines that's like, "Oh, so apparently the medieval French village was transported there magically from many different regions of the world, since it included many black and Asian or whatever blacksmiths among the medieval French peasants." And he's like, apparently apparently time travel exists in the world of Beauty and the Beast, as well as bilocation. And
well, it's not just the issue I have with that is what people have when they're writing like medieval settings, they have a very modern mindset to travel. Where if you wanted to travel to somewhere, it costs maybe a few $1,000s, to not a few $1,000s, probably like a few $100s to go on an airplane, and you spend at most. They probably assume, oh, it's a few extra days. The issue is there. You have only a few people who would actually be able to travel, and they are.
It would take years.
Well, it would take years to do that distance, but even something like
the next town over.
I saw this for
if going to like one town to the other might take like all day or a couple days.
You better have a good reason,
right,
and not working.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was reading Lord of the Rings, the pacing and how they travel and stuff, it kind of made me realize like, oh wow, there's a lot of time to walk or ride or horse or things like that. That was kind of cool because
The issue is people will also treat horses like cars.
Oh yeah.
Like, right.
You hop on your horse and you drive this way.
No.
Yeah.
And being a horse lady, I know that's not true.
John again.
The horse should probably be a main character if you're gonna have one.
Yeah.
John again has a little interesting detail. John C. Wright again in his story Nativity. There's a little interesting detail at one point early in the story where the main character travels back in time to the birth of Christ, and he's outside somewhere. He sees a line of crucifixions, and he's in between towns, Bethlehem, and the guy spots him, and they start talking with each other. And he goes, "Oh, you're going to Bethlehem? So am I. It's not that far away." And they're walking, and the main character mentions that it was like several hours later, and this guy was still cheerfully talking to him, and he was, and in his head, he's exhausted, and he's thinking, "What do you mean, not that far away?"
Yeah, well, when someone, because I saw this, because there's a game I have, I just got called. It's based off of a book series called The Witcher. I believe that's a game series too, but someone had mentioned that there's some brouhaha over it not having enough diversity or something, and something on the article that said, Byzantium, Constantinople was only 1,000 miles away from Poland. 1,000 miles away is
ridiculous.
You're looking at, I did some of the math. If you are very generous, with how many miles someone can cover and give it like 10, I think I did like 5 or 10, or I might have done 20. It takes like 4 months because you can't just go from straight line middle of Poland, say Warsaw, I don't know if that's the middle of Poland, to Byzantium. You have to go from town to town to resupply because you're not going to be able to have 3 months worth of supplies on your back. Or you're going to have a horse rest stuff. You're going to have to do all this. The thing is, for there to be travel and therefore to have lots of integration, you need you need to have a few things. You have to have safety for one thing, which is why you had a lot more integration and migration, I believe, in Imperial Rome, because they had a more robust road system. But you also have to have a good return on investment, because you have to say, taking myself out of commission and not working on the farm for 4 months, it's going to this place is going to be worth it. And there's a few people who do that for a living, and they're merchants. Those are usually the guys you see traveling around. And the issue is, we don't think like that. We don't think traveling to this place, is it going to be a return on investment that means I'll be able to eat?
Will I make a profit from going here?
Right. It's not just will I make a profit, it's will I make enough of a profit to survive through the winter?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Should I go here rather than here, which is closer?
Right. Or stay home and work.
Yeah. Or stay home and work.
Getting us a little bit more back on topic, I have a few things to say. If you look at most good stories, okay, if you have a cast of characters, if they all have the exact same personality, it's not going to make the story very interesting. So you need diversity in personality, because the diversity and having different kinds of people oftentimes affects the story where it's going, because you have different people with different interests, different reactions. It helps the story. The second thing you should look at when creating a cast of characters is diversity in their thoughts and philosophy, how they view the world, because again, there are different ways of looking at things, and different reactions can affect how the story goes.
Well, if you have a debate between two characters, both of them must be wrong somewhere, or at least not agree with your philosophy.
Right.
Yeah,
Or
I'm just
the truth
talking
of the
about
world.
generally. Yeah, just in general though, as you make a cast of characters, if you have everyone with the same personality, it's going to be boring. If you have everyone with the same way of looking at things, it's going to be boring. But it's because those things affect
Those
how
are
they
integral
act.
to the character.
Yeah. Now, things like skin color and sexuality, unless they affect the plot,
Or the personality.
yeah, or the personality, then it's not really that big of a deal.
I have an
like, if
example
you-
of this. In Starship Troopers, a book written by Heinlein, you do not find out the race of the main character until the end of the book. And in Have Space Super Travel, you never find out what skin color the main character is. He's just a guy. And
Yeah,
it's
often-
not
So wait,
important to the story.
Johnny
Oftentimes,
Rico from
I don't-
Starship Troopers, isn't he Filipino, I think?
I think. I don't know, nor do I care.
Doesn't really matter
He's
because
a
he's dropping down in
warrior. That's all
awesome
that
power
matters.
armor. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome power
I
armor.
think-
That's like,
I can't.
Yeah.
I think only sometimes does a book tell me what skin color or race that person is. I mean, unless they're describing the person, what they look like, or if it affects the story, then most of the time I don't notice it, or it doesn't really. I don't think it's ever mentioned. I'm trying to think of books I've read that specifically mention
I've
the
seen it
race of a
cited, like,
character.
just in passing, but
Yeah.
usually it's because here's part of where that can come in. It could be a conflation because, as I said, there's not as much mobility and travel in, say, fantasy as there is in real life because of
Fiction.
The requirement to kind of stay local and work. So what you could have is you could have people of different races, and they act as it's less of a their races are the difference and more of cultures, because if they all come from different cultures, there you could have some very interesting things. If some cultures value freedom over others which value conformity and adherence to tradition, you could have a lot of
Or law, which is
yeah.
where that idea comes from.
You could have a lot more of an
A more
interesting cast
debate.
of character. Yeah, exactly. Well, not just a debate, but characters playing off each other and being making this story interesting.
Yeah, I think because a lot of times when I see diversity in fiction being pushed, it's the superficial things, the like bottom things on the list that you need, like the race or minorities or things like that.
It's racism. They focus on the race as the important part, as if the color of the imaginary character's skin can tell you anything. It's like it would be like saying his hair color matters or his sign. It's not important
Now,
to
the
the
only-
story unless it's important to the story.
Right. It's not going to be it's kind of like it's a reverse Chekhov's gun thing.
Yeah.
If it's not going to be, used later, it's not as important
Don't
unless
have
it's
it in
description.
there.
Well, either
The
that or
only
just
way I can see skin color or even hair color being important is if you have a character, say there's a group of characters and they have to go into this city or something, but everyone in that city is really against people with purple eyes or their skin color, their hair, and then that's a dilemma for them. But that has to do with the plot and the characters and everything. That's the only.
either
That's
that or unless they're Irish, because then if they go out in the sun, they boil like lobsters. I can speak from experience.
My dad can too.
Declan Finn recently mentioned something in passing, I think, on the Black Panther trailer and maybe somewhere else, that I think in the review, in the thing he wrote about that Black Panther comic that was canceled, like Black Panther and Friends or something like that, he mentions that they're trying to lump Black Panther in as black character, when he said this is the most ridiculous thing because he is the king of a wealthy, small African nation, and we're going to be saying that he shares the black experience with an poor inner city rat. and they're going. It's absolutely. It makes no sense at all because they're.
It was like the 4 characters they had. One of them was like involved in cosmic battles, and the other 2 was like basically I think Luke Cage.
Black Panther in the queue?
Yeah, so they're like, how on earth are they sharing any sort of experience? The fact that they have the same skin color means that they bond on some mystical level in ways that we can't understand. Like, he goes to America, he sees a black guy, and they mind meld, and he goes, "I feel your pain, brother."
Well, you can feel
the only way
you can feel
I
their
could see
pain,
that if, say, you're
sharing an
on alien, say
experience.
you're a human that goes to an alien planet, and then you see another human in the midst of all these other aliens. I could see that being like, "Hey, you're like me."
But
that
skin color is not an alienizing thing.
Yeah.
If the human's been living among the aliens and is now an alien, then you're really not going to say, you and I, we share the same experience, because that guy's going to look
not sharing the same
at you,
experience, but
and he's going to go, "You mean you grew up on Zanara too?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
but let me clarify.
That's the stupidity of it.
Yeah. What I was saying or meaning to say was, I think it's kind of silly that you're going to see someone and instantly be like, "Oh, you know exactly how I feel," and we connect on this special level. I can only really see it as if you see someone, like I said, if you're, I don't know, even if you're like you're white and you're in a bunch of with a bunch of black people, and you see another white person, it's like, "Oh, hey, it's someone my same skin color," but it's very just kind of like more of an observation than anything else. Is the only way I can
with
see
them on a
that.
deep level. That's the thing.
You're noticing what
Talk
color
to that
their
person.
skin is.
Yeah,
The Black Panther,
Hello?
King of Wakanda, is going to have much more in common with world leaders like Trump than any random black guy in the city, or any random white
we should make a
guy,
comic about
or
Black
any
Panther
random.
and Trump being buddies. That would be funny.
Well,
I mean, like, you could really say that about any character anywhere. He's going, just because Donald Trump goes into the city, he's going to have much more in common with a rich black businessman who's the real estate market than a random white dude who walks past him in the street.
The poor, hillbilly from Appalachia is going to have much less in common with someone like, say, Trump or Warren Buffett or someone who's very rich versus someone who's versus a guy who makes his money off of real estate, as you said. That's the thing is, I think there can be a connection between someone's race and someone's experiences, and that's usually through a culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
absolutely, and how
it's a what in statistics it's a confounding variable. I might have gotten that wrong. It's been forever since I've taken statistics, and I've tried to block out those horrendous memories. But it's a variable.
Correlating variable? I don't remember the term either.
It's a correlation, but it's not a causation.
These two things are related, but it's usually a higher percent than the actual percent of this causes that or that causes this.
If it's correlation but not causation, that means they're not necessarily related, but they do correlate.
Which means they're technically related, but it's usually them being related through associated with a different variable. Now that was too much math, I'm gonna shut up now.
Okay, well, when you
more stories, less math.
Okay.
I think it's also I think it's also fair to say when you look at that sort of thing that, like, yeah, obviously there are going to be situations where, being black in or white in a certain place is going to make a difference how people treat you or whatever. But especially when you're talking about science fiction and fantasy and you're going into different worlds and things, how boring is it to take our normal political landscape and then just say, also, everybody is treated exactly the same way they are in our world today on the alien planet of
wherever,
Xandar. On the alien planet of Xandar, the political landscape of blacks and whites is exactly the same as it is today.
Why wouldn't it be that the Xandarians...
I mean, how boring is that?
Because
I get
you
it in
have to act
certain stories.
work.
Yeah. In certain stories, you need to take that into account in terms of, like, you know, just the experiences people are going to have in the world. But when you're writing these space operas and things, when you take into account the current political atmosphere, I think that the real question is, like, why would you do that and also write a space opera?
It's I would say it's less of that because and more of, don't make this literally just a carbon copy of today. We don't want to see current political drama in space. That's not what we're
I'm
paying.
living here. I don't want to see it again.
Isaac Asimov did the rise and fall of the Roman Empire in space in his Foundation series, except he did it in a way. First off, we aren't all immediately familiar with exactly how the rise and fall of the Roman Empire would go, and then he did it in an entirely new setting, and he did it with new political backgrounds and this cool sci-fi premise around it. But, like, if you want to go back briefly, like, because I know that we didn't really want to get into it, but Black Lives Matter in space. Yeah. Well, like, I can look at that in the real world and see these issues and watch them.
The way it used to be done was they would basically abstract the certain political conundrum, and they'd basically reframe it in a story. They, instead of, say, being
Nazis,
black versus,
they'd be Moon Men.
Yeah. Or
That's
or
actual
instead
example,
of
by the way.
saying, you know, talking about
Timeline had the American Revolution on the moon, and the moon is a harsh mistress.
And what you can do if you take something that's kind of happening nowadays, make it a little bit different, you can then explore what might happen or play around with it. That's kind of the point of science fiction is fantasy, is you can have whole different worlds and crazy things to play with. And so you shouldn't just stick what's happening now in it unless you have something interesting you want to play it or spin it a different way. Otherwise, explore, put in different species, different views and different ways, maybe come up with a whole nother political system. That's
and that's not even that. And to be clear, we're not even referencing whether we agree with any of these political stuff or not. We're just saying from a business perspective, the reader's expecting something different and new. If they wanted to read what they you know, what was happening in real life, they'd read a literary novel. God help their souls. But
or a newspaper.
But they're reading they're reading a space opera. They're expecting to go into space, or they're reading a fantasy book. They're expecting to, you know, come across a dragon or a wizard at some point.
They don't want to be in this world. They want to be in that world.
Exactly.
They want to see how the world works there. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be. It can be a world like ours, but it has to be different from ours in some major way.
Right. And
I don't. If we're, let's say, on planet Vulcan, I don't think they would have a republic, or if they do, it wouldn't work the same way we do, because they don't have emotions in the same way we do. Right.
And the issue with a lot of this stuff that happens is the issue I see with a lot of it is it used to be, if you wanted to talk about racism, you wouldn't talk about whites being racist to blacks or whatever have you. You'd
talk about men
aliens.
Who are half white and half black, who are white on one side, being racist against people who are black on that side instead of white. You'd
have aliens or something.
Yeah,
aliens
that wasn't
on humans. And
if you were to talk about this concept, you'd put it on its head. That's how that works.
Right. What you do is you'd abstract. You take out. You basically take to the core of the issue, and you could assign whatever parties you wish to either side to, quote unquote, discuss it. But you're not just copy and pasting our current political problems into the future, and that's something that I think is kind of iffy. With that. I don't read the space opera to be informed of my politics. I read a space opera because I want to see some planets explode.
Yeah. Now I have a another idea we could talk about. In diversity of the books themselves, like I noticed like when Hunger Games came out and then Divergent came out and then I think like Maze Runner. I only read Hunger Games and part of Divergent, but they seem to kind of tell the same sort of story-ish in some way or other. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, yeah, a dystopia and girl doing a thing and this and that.
The Maze Runner was not that. It was a guy. It was a guy doing a thing. It's just kind of weird, but
oh yeah,
I was okay with it.
I get through that book.
My point is, do you think there's much diversity in storytelling in modern fiction, or do you think they kind of follow the same?
I would say you'd have to look to the indie scene for that, and this is coming from a more mercantilistic perspective, in the sense that my theory, and I've not done the economic research to see if this is entirely accurate, but it is a theory based off of how I know people act, is the reason that Hunger Games was quickly followed by Divergent and Maze Runner.
Because someone else had the same idea, read that book, and had a similar idea based off it.
And the publishers saw.
I'm not sure.
The Hunger Games
wondered
sold
if
out.
True.
One at a time. You guys are all talking at once.
Oh, sorry. The Hunger Games sold like mad fire, so everyone tried to jump on the dystopia chain. When it was Twilight, when the book about the girl getting falling in love with the vampire. When that hit the markets and it went wild, regardless of its quality, mind you, when that just it sold
note on that.
A lot.
An interesting note on Twilight. That's actually one of the better books of its genre. It just was not meant for guys to read. It's not a good book, but it's one of the better books for its genre.
Also, if
and then its genre exploded afterwards because
do you think so? Farewell. I hope.
Bye,
goodbye, Jess.
Yes, nice having you on.
Thank you.
And we lost him. A moment of silence for our companion, Jess.
Since we were talking about Hunger Games.
April. Yeah. Well, I suspect that that's less to do with lack of diversity and more to do with, this book sold really well. Let's hop on this train and ride it to death.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
I've always wondered how many of those books were written by people who were trying to jump on the bandwagon, or if they were written by people who already happened to be writing those types of books. But
yeah, because how annoying would it be if you came up with this on your own and someone beat you to the punch, and then you look like a copycat?
Exactly, because I saw Harry Potter, I think, was the most notorious. The worst I read was this book called the Charlie Bone series, and I read the first book, and it was when the pictures started moving and he was sent to a magical school that I threw it away in disgust. Because at the same time, I always wondered later on if, did this guy just have an idea for a book and then it was published after Harry Potter, or was he literally just copying Harry Potter? We can't really know, so I always try to be. Yeah. I try to be more fair to these authors too.
Yeah, I
think if you fall into that, you should either wait a while until the trends kind of faded down to publish it, or change it up a little bit so you don't look like you're copying them.
I think John C. Wright says to copy 2 books at once. Because it's the. Yeah. Well, yeah. I've got too many.
Part of the art of writing is taking art in general is taking an old thing or concept and turning it into a new image.
Right. There's nothing new under the sun. To quote a
but you can make it look. But you can dress it up to look new.
Right. You can dust
Romeo and Juliet has been told 1,000,000 times, but people still want to hear it.
Huh.
What I do is I literally take characters from other stuff, stick them in my settings, and see how that changes them.
Yeah.
I mean, I have stolen a character directly from several times from other works. Like just said, I'm going to take this exact character, I'm going to put him in my setting, alter a few background details, and then see how this changes him.
He becomes a completely different
And if
guy.
you steal two ideas at once, then you can't tell which idea came from where.
Right.
Exactly. You steal from different sources.
And then it's less of plagiarism and more of
inspiration.
Sneaky plagiarism.
Inspiration.
The essence of writing.
Inspiration.
Plagiarism.
The definition of inspiration.
Yeah. I've actually had to deal with plagiarism, so I'm a bit iffy on saying sneaky plagiarism, but I haven't done it, but I'm going through an issue at the moment with someone doing that to my stuff. But yeah, it'll be fine. But anyway, what I was saying was there's another thing that I thought was interesting, was something that I see constantly brought up, is especially in fantasy, because that's most of the stuff I write, is I'd like to see a fantasy story that's not written in, basically kind of vaguely Norse-ish or England-ish Europe.
A fantasy story that does not take place during the Middle Ages in Europe. That's what you want to see.
That's what some people are like. Why don't we see more of those? And
there are more now, though. They're getting more and more common.
Oh yeah, the one there's one I read that was kind of set in like a mix of China and Japan that I started reading, but unfortunately life got in the way. Have to get that back. But another one that was actually really good, and I heard it won an award, was one that was set in like Southeast Asia in India.
Was that Larry's Son of the Black Sword?
Yes,
Son of the Black Sword.
Yes, which also had the freakiest death scene ever.
Don't describe it.
I'm not going to, but it was just like,
like if one person.
Larry is good at weird, crazy.
Yeah, Larry's good.
Thing.
Yeah, Larry, and who's the other guy? I thought who wrote? They write very diverse, very diverse cast. The other one's Brandon Sanderson with his Stormlight archive. I mean, he had someone of every color in the group. He had some people who had skin colors that didn't even exist. Oh yeah, he's like a periwinkle blue. He's black and red, marbled colored. It's like, okay, that works.
I do not care.
It's like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Sometimes things like that add an interesting detail. They just bring the world that he's describing a little more vivid. If you have, I like to do that in my island story, since there's so much going on there. Oftentimes, I like to describe the different people around because it gives you a sense of that world.
Yeah, it gives you this veneer of depth to it.
You see the life of it.
Yeah, whereas if you're just seeing here's a kind of a sense where it could work. If you're seeing everyone and they look the same, that would basically kind of make your reader think that this is kind of all that there is. But if you see someone who's from another place, that makes them think that that world has more depth and more character, and thus kind of more realism to it. If there are other cultures besides this one, yeah. and that's a use for I guess racial diversity, is a sense to that this little country is not the scope of the entire world.
The art of writing is also the art of history telling. You are basically telling the history of if in fantasy and science fiction, of an alien point in the past or an alien point in the future, with a group of people you, through your writing skill, have met and know what happened to them.
Now, I will say this for potential writers. When he says that, I'm going to put a caveat. Your readers don't actually want a history. They don't want a history textbook of a non-existent world. They're going to want a story. So
I'm going to put a caveat to your caveat. Acting an explanation of what I'm saying.
Okay.
That a story is how history is supposed to be told and how it was told before the modern school system. His story is supposed to be the story of our past. You're supposed to.
Yeah, I read Herodotus. I read a bit of Herodotus's histories. I'm like, he's a storyteller. He just happens to be telling stories.
Real events. That's what's happened. That's all history really is. It's our story. You're supposed.
May I try and sum up what you both are saying?
Yes.
Basically, Orwell's saying is you, especially if you're creating your own universe, you should think about and develop that universe in your head so that that universe has depth and its own unique thing about it. And in the story you write that your reader will read, you should only add in the reader wants to read the story you're telling, not the entire history of the world it's set in, unless part of that history has to do with the story you're telling and the plot.
Exactly.
So you as a writer, it's good to know you can come up with all kinds of things that may never really make surface in the story itself, but it will help you as a writer add little details and help you write the story if you know how the world works around it.
Right. Now the thing with that is that's kind of, and that's part of where part of the thing that you want to do, and this is just my perspective, is with the idea of having quote unquote diverse characters. As I said, I'm all for it. My main character in the science fantasy story, she's pretty quote unquote diverse. Her best friend's a Texan who happens to also be a indigo skinned alien, and her roommate's kind of what happens when you throw a fox, a bat, and a tiger into a blender, besides, getting a mess. And it's a bit crazier than that, because I have like 40 or 50 different species there. But there's one aspect I see other people do, which is, every single race has their own culture.
No, every race should have multiple cultures.
Yeah, if you look at ancient China, you could say everyone there
like ancient Rome.
Or saying that every person of the same race thinks the same way isn't true.
What I was going to say is, if you look at ancient China, like say Tang Dynasty or Han Dynasty China, you could pretty accurately say everyone ruled by the Han Dynasty or the Tang Dynasty was Chinese. I would say colloquially you could say that, but there's multiple different ethnicities, hundreds of different cultures united under that empire. So when people say, in fantasy, say all the elves have one monoculture and all the dwarves have the exact same culture, that I could kind of almost see where I see where these people are coming from, because I'd like to see it's not just elves versus humans, but two different races of elves get into a war with each other or something.
Tolkien has a little bit of that when he has his wolf elves, his I forget what the other ones were called. I think like the star elves. I don't know what the elven name was, and that the wood elves were not as intelligent and not as advanced as the star elves, and that sometimes they didn't get, and they liked dwarves less and they were less patient. So he did have some interesting stuff there with that, but generally,
the actual Elvish name, I'm sorely disappointed in you, Anthony. Sorely disappointed.
You don't need to be disappointed.
I don't know it either, so.
Exactly.
I can't even remember the names of characters sometimes, much less their elven names.
Yeah.
But in that sense, also Tolkien just uses different mythological creatures and gives them their own internal politics. So
right, like I saw something that was saying, dwarves were supposed to be like some racial slur. I think someone said they were a racial slur against Jews. I'm like, excuse me?
They're Vikings,
which is
they're from there's
which is totally absurd.
Yes, unless it gets. Yeah, and also there's an article that I have bookmarked, and I'll throw in the show notes from, I think it was Gizmodo, that has, where is it? The title of it is actually really funny. It's "What's classier than J.R.R. Tolkien telling off Nazis? Absolutely nothing." Because
Tolkien was awesome.
Yeah, because what happened was, and April, I'm saying this up in the chat. What happened was, apparently, the story is he had to submit his a basically racial history background to be published in German for The Hobbit, and he drafted up 2 letters. And one of the things that he said was, "I don't really feel kind of comfortable doing this if they're going to ask, what's your racial history? Do you have any Jews in your family?" I don't like that, because I find this what did he say precisely? I'm going to actually read it. He said something along the lines of, I do not regard the stop pulling up probable absence of all Jewish blood as necessarily honorable. I have many Jewish friends, and should regret giving any color to the notion that I subscribe to the wholly pernicious and unscientific race doctrine. It's like, yeah, you're going to have a very, very difficult time selling me. He's basing his fantasy characters off racial stereotypes. If there's writing something like that. What is your problem? The website keeps flipping out on me. Sorry.
Okay. If we need another topic to talk about, we could talk about. I think we've mentioned it a little bit, like how we come up with characters, and how much thought we put into them being what they are, diverse or not.
May I start?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I usually come up with the power first because my imagination works like an anime. It does. I watch a lot of anime and I tend to follow.
So do they scream the names of their attacks right before they actually do the attack and give it away?
I have not gotten to that yet, but they probably do. I love messing with powers, so when I make up a character, I tend to make up the power set first, and then make up the guy, and then just kind of
shape the character around that power set.
Well, yeah, kinda. I also tend to use stereotypes. When I get more in depth in the characters, I try and make them more.
I assume you mean more character and theme based as opposed to race based stereotypes, because it doesn't sound like something you do.
No, character stereotypes like the cool loner type or the cute girl.
Yeah,
type.
I know what you mean.
Not stereotypes, then archetypes.
Archetypes. I tend to use archetypes.
Yeah.
Which gives you plenty of diversity of type, at least.
Mm-hmm. And okay, well, Anthony, so how do you come up with characters who fight vampires with gigantic, ridiculous battles in the middle of New Jersey?
Wait, what?
I was asking Anthony something. How do you come up with your characters?
All right, yeah, the way
Paladin.
Yeah, I did, because I want you to do illustrations for it, Corey, and one day you will.
Whether you agree or not.
Exactly.
Good luck, Corey.
That may be a threat. We'll see.
Crack.
No, the way I come up with characters is, I mentioned it before. Yeah, I steal them. I steal them directly. I steal them shamelessly. I literally take a character from another spot and I say, now I am going to use you in my story instead.
Yep.
And
okay.
So for Paladin, which Paladin was actually mainly inspired, if you want to talk about the really big inspiration for Paladin, it was Frank Miller's Daredevil, which is a gritty, street-level urban superhero story that also has ninjas. So
okay.
I feel like Frank Miller created this thing where he somehow managed to make it feel both more real and more gritty and darker, while at the same time being able to add these really fantastic elements.
Like
so I wanted to do something like that.
You can get by with anything if you give a good explanation.
Right. I wanted to do something. I'm going to make a gritty inner city superhero story, like with noir elements like Daredevil, and that you have gang wars and it has all of that sort of stuff. Except that I'm also going to add supernatural creatures and Knights of King Arthur and all of that stuff.
This sounds like it'll be a great load of fun.
And
so it's what happens.
So when
Knights of King Arthur team up with Harry Dresden almost.
Sort of. I have a whole. I'm not going to go into it because that wasn't what the question was about. Basically, the one character that I have, I decide to add him in later on because actually, after a discussion with some of the pulp guys, got me to thinking that I probably needed someone who was a less powered character to use as an anchor for the plot. and also that it made him more interesting. Somebody who's not superpowered among superpowered people, how is he going to survive? How is he going to contribute? So I said, what character?
How does the cop with the gun stand side by side with Superman?
Exactly.
How does Batman stand up with Superman? Basically.
Because he's Batman.
Yeah. So I took a. So what I did, I literally had seen Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them not that long ago. So I said, I'm going to take the character of Jacob from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and I am going to make him a character in my story. So I picked a guy. I created. The backstory was that he was a police officer who became really disillusioned at crime in the town. By the way, it's based on Camden, New Jersey, and if ever any of you ever get the chance to look up Camden, it's sort of like a real life Gotham City, but with less money. It's the murder capital of the country. There was literally a point police force by like 70% because they gave up on the town.
Oh,
they
gosh.
actually gave up on the police saving the town, so they decided to just cut their losses and basically eliminate police. So that's why I thought this would be a great setting for an inner city superhero story, like Gotham
because
City.
This place needs one.
Yeah, it's not where Anthony, you there? Because you cut out.
Oh, am I here?
Yeah, you
Yes.
cut out for a moment.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, the idea of the story with Camden and whatever is that I'm going to take characters from other sources. I'm going to place them in my world, and I'm going to see how they react and how they interact. So I took that character of Jacob from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I turned him into a disillusioned cop who quit the force because he realized how insanely corrupt it was and how little effect they could have. And then he's thrown in on this adventure, and he sees it as like the opportunity that he never had before to actually make a real difference in the town, which is sort of like what you see with Jacob in the movie, how he gets pulled onto this adventure by Newt Scamander, and he looks at it as something that's extremely cool and brings stuff to his life and brings excitement and friends into his life that he never really experienced before. And it's the same sort of idea that this is not a bad thing that he discovered that this stuff exists because he wants to help, and now it's there. He has the chance.
Very cool. Corey.
God
if-
picked him for a reason.
All right, yeah. Well, the way I do it is I tend to go with I do what I refer to as trope subversion, where it's not anti-superversive, but it's in the sense of you're playing around and messing with other tropes. Like for Fever Blood.
That's fun.
Yeah, for the main character, his name's Lai Tsung. He's a soldier, also happens to be a theologian, but that's part of his backstory. And unlike, he's not the world-weary soldier who just wants to do his job. He's got his own code of honor. Then you meet a character who's I took the stereotype of orcs from games like Skyrim or World of Warcraft that made them a proud warrior race that tend to be kind of dumb but brawny. So I have a big character who seems dumb but brawny at the beginning, and then you start realizing, actually, no, he's basically he's basically a genius and a bookworm. He just pretends to be dumb and brawny because that's the stereotype for them. And if he just pretends to be a stereotype, no one's going to assume otherwise. He's fulfilling their expectations. They won't have to look any closer. And
He can walk under the radar.
Exactly, and he kind of needs to do that for his own purpose. I basically come up with, ooh, this is a cool idea. I'll throw that in. Ooh, that's a cool idea. I'll throw that in. And that's
I'm noticing a pattern here.
I like cool ideas.
Same.
Is there a problem with that?
No. I'm just noticing a pattern.
Yeah. I also like the main character, Lidu. He's half dragon. He can't breathe fire. I made that clear, and it really annoys him. At the very beginning, he's unable to breathe fire. But what he can do is he can heat his body up, so he can heat up like his hand to the point where he can cause burns.
Ooh, that's a cool power.
Yeah, and I also mess around with what I do is I mess around with different tropes. Like I have the main character uses blood magic, except it's not he has to sacrifice people. It's his own blood. So the danger is expend too much, you will die of anemia. I think that's the correct term. You'll die of blood loss without ever getting cut.
That is cool.
Yeah, and what I end up doing is for the an alchemy of stars, I go, what happens if alchemy is proven to be real in a way that nobody understands, and it launches basically a second scientific revolution to understand a paranatural science. And then I have, okay, I'm going to have every character kind of be a bit different from a archetype or a stereotype. Like I have the brawny the brawny warrior stereotype. It's tempered by them being a rather he's partnered with a woman who's also a mercenary because she grew up in if Camden, which I've been near, so, and I've definitely heard the horror stories. If Camden had a fantasy setting city, it's the place she grew up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's basically survives by being ridiculous. She's ridiculously proficient with how she fights. Instead of her being the one to calm everyone down, the big brawny guy is usually the one who has to de-escalate the situation, while looking like he's not trying to de-escalate the situation.
Oh, that sounds like it'd be fun to write.
Yeah, Scaria is quite fun to write, but the main thing is I do what happens with to get the real character based diversity is I do what's there's a woman who writes on how to write named Holly Lyle, and she wrote a book that changed how I write called her Creating Character Clinic. It's like $9 on Amazon, $9.99 on Amazon. Definitely worth it if you want to get into writing, because she goes through, and the main thing that she says is, what do they want? What does your character want? And then you just ask questions. What will they do not to get it? Why won't they do that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I won't give away too much, but what I do is I give every single person there, it's a Kurt Vonnegut rule. Every character has to want something, even if it's just a glass of water.
Yeah.
And I give every single character, they want something different. And I just kind of let the dominoes fall.
Everyone should have a goal in the scene and in the plot. Everyone should have a personal stake and a public stake, and everyone should have two contrasting things in their personality and their goals.
That is, yes. And that's kind of universal for everyone, whether they be elves or dwarves or highly intelligent computers that tend to disguise themselves as penguins in bow ties.
Yep.
Rhadamanthus is my spirit animal.
That sounds like fun.
Rhadamanthus is my spirit animal, let's be honest.
Okay.
I had a 3-foot tall Rhadamanthus penguin in my room. My sister would dress it up with makeup, and I think it eventually fell apart. But Rhadamanthus is very. Anyway, we were getting derailed by a penguin.
Yes.
Corey, is there anything else you wanted to say? Otherwise, I'll take my turn.
I just focus on what do the characters want, and I say, oh, I'll take this little stereotypical archetype and flip it around. That's about it.
Cool. Okay. I was thinking about it, and I was trying to think about the stories I've written and how they played out. Most of the time, I think I started writing my island story that that made me start thinking about what kind of characters look like what, or things like that. I've written a handful of things that are not so much set in their own world or just short stories. And so I never had a purpose to explicitly say what, like race-wise or anything like that. All I had in the story was their character. And I also had the thought, me as a reader, usually if someone's I don't know, like I don't know, just kind of a random thought. Like if their skin color isn't explicitly expressed, I kind of assume they're white just because that's what I'm used to. And I was just kind of wondering
I've done the opposite, actually.
Really?
There's a character in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn book named Sazed, who every picture I've seen of him makes him look like almost like a white professor guy. I imagined him as I don't know the name of the actor, but the guy who plays Walter in season 1 of Arrow. I imagined him as looking exactly like that.
Yeah, sometimes.
I don't. I don't know. I don't know his name. I'll have to look it up later. But I've done that where it's like, oh, you picture him as this. I don't know why, but I never did.
Yeah. Sometimes the character paints their own picture in your mind. But as far as my writing, I know one time I was writing a scene for my island story where some of I call them guardians, kind of the little leaders in the different areas of my island had a little council. And so I was like, okay, can I throw into them, and especially relating to what areas they came from. So I think I had a lady in a purple turban. I had a conjoined twin, and some other things I can't remember. But I think the island story is the only kind of think about how my characters look. But that's like the main story I've written.
We're not talking about how they look generally. We're talking about how you come up with what the characters are like. How do you do that?
I'm not really sure, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'd like to make an addendum to how I come up with characters. They generally just kind of come to me and tend to exist in their own rights, as far as I can tell.
Sometimes they show up in my head. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, I've had characters that I did not plan that decided to make themselves into the story as I wrote it. That happens a lot.
Okay, so I'm not the only one that happens to. Good.
No, that happens to everyone,
one time I had
sure.
a character fall in a hole and it changed, like, met another character and it changed the plot in some dramatic way. But yeah, I don't know. I don't remember how I make up my characters. I don't
think
know.
they just wander onto the set and start acting.
My cat drags them in. This is what happens. My cat drags them in.
Yeah.
I made it sound like I just come up with all these, like, I come up with their compelling needs. It's exciting when I realize, oh wait, this is what the guy wanted. I finally figured it out, because I can write them because I imagine them so much. I know how they kind of react in any situation. The big hulking 8.5 foot tall, quarter ton of muscles. Honestly, in a party, he'd probably be like, I'll go grab a drink, find a book, and find somewhere quiet. But like, I know that just because I've imagined him doing everything like that. Like, and then I kind of figure out, this is what he wants, and then I kind of figure out, okay, this is what he wants, which helps when I'm going back, which I'm going to do now after the stream, and edit, so I know, okay, this is where I can make him more clear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it looks like we're actually kind of running out of a bit of time, so maybe everyone could.
Yeah, I was about to say,
kind of give their
probably.
I was just thinking
our last thoughts.
Yeah, our last thoughts, and we sign out for this, and be back next month. So, Orville, your last thoughts on the subject of.
On the subject of diversity, well, I think it's important to have differences and not important to care about the minor differences of physical appearances. You can be made of floating leaves, or be a ghost, or be a giant, and those three guys, or you can have earlobes going down to your feet, and in One Piece, you do not, when you meet a guy, you at first think they're very weird, but you just kind of get to know them and start thinking of them as themselves, not as this weird-looking thing. That's what I think of diversity. It's not important.
I abstain from all kinds of intoxicants and stuff like that, but I have to imagine that watching One Piece must be very similar to what an acid trip must look like.
It would look like an acid trip if said acid trip made perfect logical sense.
Yeah,
and had very great characters. Awesome moments.
The acid trip was rigorously plotted. Yeah.
So One Piece is a acid trip.
Yes, a rigorously plotted acid trip. Anyway,
should
Anthony,
write that as a
it looks like an
That
acid
is a
trip, but
great-
really an elegant symphony.
And now it's the Whippersnapper motto: a vigorously plotted acid trip.
Yeah,
Okay.
That
I'll write that
almost
down.
rivals my other favorite quote.
Which is?
Chocolate is the answer. Who cares what the question is?
No, let's go with the other one.
I like the vigorously plotted acid trip better.
It's the Whippersnapper motto.
I'm writing that down somewhere.
I am
Okay,
too.
well, that's a good note.
Anthony,
Anybody else have any final thoughts?
I was gonna go through Anthony and then you, but
Okay, I'll go quick then. Honestly, what I think about the subject is what I thought about is pretty much how I always thought about the subject, which is you include diversity if it will enhance your story. You don't if it doesn't. I mean, and never just shoehorn it in for no reason. You know,
April.
if you're never do medieval France and add black background people and then open up theories of teleportation and time travel.
Or if you do, give a reason. It works
Or
for
add
Imperial Rome.
teleportation to your story.
Or time travel.
April, any final words?
Basically what Anthony said. If it improves the story, adds depth to your background, do it. And also don't forget about it. Like if you have a world that you're making, use that. Take advantage of that. Come up with crazy things and add fun descriptions of people just because they're fun descriptions. As to kind of
Right. It can be a very good
a sense
thing
of the
to
world.
expand your world.
Mm-hmm. And
It's
have fun with
never
it.
a bad thing to add detail.
Right. Well, there's some instances
If
where
done
that could be.
properly.
Right.
It's never a bad
Yes.
thing to add detail if done properly.
Right. My final thoughts are I'm going to reference someone that is going to give Anthony a conniption, and don't worry, I'm not mentioning her well. Kate Chopin is a case study. You can look at this. In her book, The Awakening, the main character, Edna Pontellier, is set up to be, she's a wife trapped in a loveless marriage, and she is thoroughly, and here's the thing, that would be considered a female character leading is considered nowadays to be a diverse character, and she's one of the most unlikable people you could ever meet. Diversity will not make your character likable, but here's the thing, it won't be able to save your character. So you have to have a character that is likable, a character that the audience can get behind and root for,
or hate.
And because here's the thing, diversity is great for adding detail, great for world building, which in fantasies can be very important. But as for character, it's going to be less about what they look like and more about
who they are,
what they act like. Because here's the thing: if your characters are all as non-diverse as possible, but they're interesting and likable, most people would read that over books whose characters are unlikable and just generally not so nice, but they're every different shade of skin under the sun.
And
diversity can be great, but exactly. Diversity can be great, but remember, it's like cinnamon. Cinnamon alone is not a good dish. It is a spice. It is a spice. It is a tertiary ingredient. It is not the main. It is not the base on which you build your book.
It is a condiment. It is something you add.
Right. If you're writing a book and you want it to be diverse, here's the tip. You can focus on that, but you should spend more time focusing on creating characters that people like and settings that feel real. Unless it's not supposed to feel real, like you're stuck in a video game or something. And
even then, you should make that non-reality feel real.
Make non-reality feel real. That's its second motto of our group. This is the Whippersnappers. Thank you for tuning in. And
join us next time
plotted acid trip.
Plotted acid trip.
Yep.
Toodaloo, everyone.